Iran's regime may be weaker than it's been in decades, but the real question is, who takes power next?
Welcome back to the MiddleGround Mic, everybody. We got a great guest here. Iran is sitting at one of the most unstable political moments it's had in decades. New leadership structure is looking to form. Opposition voices are everywhere, and the one message is suddenly getting pushed everywhere. Iran's future should be decided by the Iranian people and not the regime and not foreign influence. But here's the real question. Is it possible? Today, we're going to unplug that with a good friend of mine, Zolal. Zolal, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, Joe, and please allow me to greet those who are tuning in to the podcast today.
Yeah, tell everybody about you, what you're about, what you do, and we'll jump in.
Well, I am a member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran's Foreign Affairs Committee and have been dedicated decades of my life to this cause. So we are active for the overthrow of the regime in its entirety and to be able to create, a true democracy in Iran. And that is what we're committed to, and to the transfer of sovereignty to the people of Iran. So that is our aim, and that is our mission in life, and that is our goal.
And that makes a whole lot of sense. A regime can look powerful right up front until it suddenly isn't. That's because up until this opposition started, you didn't really see a whole lot going on. I mean, there was always, but this, in December and January, when it really started to ignite, I think even around the world, people are kind of like, is this different? So what do you see, or what do the Iranian people see, I should say, for the future? What does that look like? How do they see how things should play out?
Well, I think you touched on a very good point that, if you look in the last decade, there have been 4 major uprisings in Iran. Each time the world is awed by the bravery of the Iranian people and their, resistance and their resilience in face of the brutal dictatorship that's ruling Iran. But unfortunately, each time it is suppressed brutally, and then there's silence for, at least in the international arena, there's silence for 1 or 2 years or whatnot until the new uprising begins. But the reality is that in Iran, we see the continuation and how these uprisings have evolved over these years. And I think that what is very important for people to realize is that the resistance doesn't die in Iran. It continues and it continues to, and it's just looking for that spark to be able to show itself. But people use every means to show their opposition to this regime in its entirety. The turning point for this uprising in January was the strike from the bazaar, and due to the economic crisis that Iran is in. And you can imagine in the last 3 months it's gotten much, much worse, especially now with the war. So people of Iran are really suffering these days economically and from every perspective when you look at it. And then, unfortunately, the uprising was met with brutal force. Thousands upon thousands were killed. Over 50,000 people were arrested and detained, and they are still in a state of limbo. Their situation is not clear. And now, today is day 15 of the war, and unfortunately, this war has had many casualties. The infrastructure in Iran is really being, a lot of it has been destroyed. But this is a continuing situation, and the people of Iran, the reality is not from today, for the Iranian resistance for the last 2 decades has actually sketched this out and, told the world that, what is the solution? The reality is that the solution is neither war nor appeasement. And as Mrs. Rajavi has reiterated time after time, that unfortunately a policy of appeasement will finally lead to a war. And that's not just us saying it, it's actual fact, and it's actual science of, because this is a science in itself, this resistance. And I mean, look at World War II, what happened?
Quick pause for a second. A lot of people ask what gear and resources I use, so I put everything in one place. The microphones, books, anything that I use, tools behind the scenes for the MiddleGround Mic. And if you want to check it out, the links are in the description. Using them helps support the show. All right, let's get back to it.
There was a policy of appeasement toward Hitler till it reached a point that there was a point of no return and a war broke out. It is the same thing with the Iranian regime, and unfortunately for 40 years, over 40 years, there's been a policy of appeasement toward this regime, and the people of Iran have paid the price for that policy of appeasement gravely. And now there's a war, but the reality is that war is never going to lead to the overthrow of this regime in its entirety. Iran is very different from other countries in the region. Iran is not Iraq, it's not Libya, it's not Afghanistan. First of all, Iran is a very large country. It's about 3 times the size of Iraq and 4 times the population. And even if you look at it from solely a military perspective, I mean, the geography, the terrain of Iran is very versatile. We have that desert, we have mountains, we have jungles, we have everything. And then it would need like city warfare because, these major cities that we have and everything. So it's a very complex situation on the ground. This regime is not a classical dictatorship like the Shah was. Like if you eliminate the Shah, or the whole system falls. The Shah escaped Iran within 2 weeks. The system fell and the revolution was completed by the people of Iran. This is very different. You eliminate Khamenei, that apparatus is still intact. That system that they have built for 47 years, it's still intact, and it just announces the new supreme leader the same way that Khomeini, once he died, Khamenei replaced him. Yes, this is a major turning point for the regime. It does make it a lot weaker. And the fact that a regime that came to replace a monarchy, which was supposed to be, they were supposed to be a republic and they were supposed to be opposed to hereditary lineage, the fact that they have now had to turn to that themselves, it speaks volume of how, what a weak position the regime is in. And, it has a message in itself. But the reality is that this isn't going to lead to regime change in Iran. Regime change in Iran will have to come from the people of Iran, and because democracy cannot be installed.
Yes.
It has to be created by the people of Iran. And the people of Iran, that has been their message, that we have the potential and the capability to bring about that change and to be able to create that path forward. We are not, so there's a third option on the table. It's not either you policy of appeasement or war. There's a third option. Support the Iranian people, have a firm policy on Iran, hold the regime accountable for its crimes, and stand by the people of Iran. Support them means, like, for instance, right now, since the beginning of the war, there has been internet blackout. This is a 15-day internet blackout, and in January we had a 19-day internet blackout. So already in 2026, a third of 2026, the people of Iran have been in internet blackout completely. So this is something that the world could have helped, and it could really make an impact and create. It could really impact the situation on the ground if people had that access and to be able to be in connection. And I mean, in a lot of different levels and realms, it would have been very effective if they had that. Also, we have to understand that due to the policy of appeasement and due to the economic relations with the Iranian regime, I mean, all of the technology that the Iranian regime is using against its own people in this war, where is it obtaining it from? I mean, it didn't have this strength if it wasn't because of those ties and because of that, technology that it was receiving from different countries in economic deals, or it might be a company or whatever, but it is receiving that. So that is the reality on the ground. But as we said, there's this third option, which is, a viable alternative to this regime. The people of the world the people of Iran have made a conscious decision, that they have that ability to bring about change. They understand the risks. They understand that no one's going to hand us freedom in a silver platter. We have to pay the price for it ourselves. But you see that, and even in January, I mean, when you look at those who were killed during the protest and you see how their families are continuing to resist, how they turn even memorial services to a way of defiance and standing in front of the regime and making pledges to continue this fight till the overthrow of the regime. On the other hand, you're also seeing, like, for instance, these videos and messages that these people actually left. Some of them said their final farewells before going to the streets because they knew that they might not come back, but they understood the risk and they did that. And so I think that's really important to understand and to have that perspective and that understand that the people of Iran are really committed to bring about that change because they want to put an end to this cycle. Because as I said, every time there's uprising, then it's brutally suppressed, and then that buys time for the regime, and then the next time it's the same thing and the same thing. So they understand that they have to continue this fight till the regime is overthrown, instead of trying to safeguard their own lives personally or whatnot. And this needs to be done as a collective. The people of Iran need to stand together, and so that is what we're seeing. And I think in the uprising, people kept on saying that there was something different this time around. First of all, people on the ground were saying you could see hope in people's eyes. The people were on the offensive. They were disarming suppressive forces. They were protecting one another. They were fighting back. So it was a new momentum that you could see in society. And that is something that continued even after the uprising. Yeah, after the uprising and after the brutal crackdown, there was martial law in states. It was very difficult to, have activities, but those activities had started to pick up. Just 1 week before the start of the war, universities resumed because till then they were all online to be able to. I guess the regime knows that universities are usually one of those hotbeds of protest. So they had actually evacuated all campuses, and then 1 week before the war, so on February 22nd, universities resumed. The day they resumed, protests broke out in universities across Iran. People, the regime realized that that uprising isn't over. They're just waiting for they need some kind of a place to be able to come to the streets or to be able to show that, but it hasn't died. And just actually 5 days before the start of the war, witnessed an operation was carried out by 250 members of resistance units in Tehran, a organized operation, and it targeted the headquarters of Khamenei, exactly the same place that was hit on the first day of the war. And that is the most secure location in all of Iran. And at a time that the regime was on heightened security because they were expecting, attacks. But then that is done, and that they were able to carry that out. I think that spoke volumes. About 100 of those 250 were either killed or detained. But that really sent a message to Iran's society and to the regime. First of all, this was unprecedented in over 2 decades. And the fact that the people of Iran gave them that hope that, resistance is still alive. This is the path forward. This is what we're going to be seeing from now on. And it needs to be, we need to take the next steps to overthrow this regime. So one of the things that we had been seeing on the ground till right before the start of the war was, mobilization to be able to take that next step in this fight. And I think that's something that's really important, and it needs to be known that so the people of Iran were going in that direction, and so they understood that this is the only way forward in face of such a brutal regime. So we were seeing that. On the other hand, I think one of the things that a lot of people worry about these days, and they're like, well, what comes next? What happens next? Or, and I think that is also something that the people of Iran know the answer to, and they have been giving that response, but it needs to be heard a lot clearer. And the thing is that the people of Iran say, look, we're not stuck choosing between the current status quo, so the religious tyranny ruling Iran, or going back to the previous dictatorship, which was a monarchy, and the Shah and whatnot. We want to move forward. In the 21st century, important. We want to move forward to a secular democratic republic. And that's where we see Right now there is two camps being created. In fact, it's what people of Iran call the camp of the people and the camp of the dictatorships, right? So the people of Iran are aligning themselves with this message that secular democratic republic, no Shah, no mullahs, an end to this hereditary, lineage, an end to someone being chosen for life, for a lifetime to come and rule over the people of Iran, and to end this, dictatorship, ruling with the iron fist, the executions, the torture, all of it needs to end. And on February 28th, actually, Mrs. Rajavi and the National Council of Resistance of Iran announced the provisional government for the transfer of sovereignty to the people of Iran. This plan was put in place in 1981, so it's not a new plan. I mean, it's a plan that's been worked on extensively, but it's the plan for an interim 6-month government. And the minute that this provisional government is on Iranian territory, within 6 months, they will hold elections to be able to choose the assembly that would be putting together the new constitution and, administrating the government during that provisional time. And once that constitution is put together, that new constitution is put together, it will be put to vote. And then based on that constitution and how that new republic is going to be, what it's going to be based on, there will be free elections in Iran. So that roadmap is clear. For that 6-month interim government, I mean, the plans are extensive that the NCRI has worked on for decades, and the 25 committees of the NCRI have been working for this moment exactly. So they are prepared for that. But, to outline it, like the guideline is the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajavi. And I think that within that, you see it really is a guideline to make sure that we go in the right path and the right direction, because it, first of all, number one, it says the ballot box is the final criterion. The fact that it calls for the abolishment of all of these suppressive forces from the IRGC to, all of it needs to go. I think that's very important. So it's not just that it's going to be rebranding from, like, that's what happened from the Shah to Khomeini. It was Savak, it became Vevak. It was the Eternal Guards, it became the IRGC. We're not just rebranding or renaming it. We are, completely putting that aside and that closing that chapter. And this is like the final pin on that coffin, and moving forward to a country where there's going to be, she calls for the abolition of the death penalty and any form of torture. And I think that's really important for Iran. I mean, Iran, that 2,200 people were executed in 2025, or we see, unfortunately, the brutalities of this regime. The fact that it calls for an independent judiciary, the fact that it calls for separation of religion and state, which is key for the people of Iran. The fact that it calls for gender equality or the rights of Iran's ethnicities to be respected and recognizes their autonomy. I think that all of these, when you look at it, and like what it presents for the international community too, a non-nuclear Iran, a Iran that is in, coexistence with its neighbors and in the region. So it's, instead of being a destabilizing force, hopefully it'll be a stabilizing force. So I think that that roadmap really serves as a guideline to be able to move forward. And that is exactly why the people of Iran have no worries about, because there are these scenarios that are raised. I think you probably heard that President Trump was asked, is the map of Iran going to stay the same after this one? And he was like, I'm not sure. Well, the people of Iran are sure that it will stay the same, because we believe in, this system. There isn't going to be or some people ask, is there going to be a civil war? No, there won't be a civil war, because the people of Iran are not fighting one another. They're fighting the regime. It's the people against the regime. And so it's, these are things that are being raised to scare people of regime change. But the reality is that that's not the case. And the people of Iran have shown that in the past. Unfortunately, the people of Iran showed it once in 1979 that they have the power to overthrow the regime. But unfortunately, their revolution was hijacked. It was during the Cold War. And unfortunately, the Western governments were, they brought in Khomeini. And the true revolutionaries who had created that revolution, they were either executed or they were in prison till the last days. And once they were released, it was already too late. Khomeini was in power. So the reality is that we as a nation have been fighting for our freedom for 120 years. The people of Iran have learned a lot of lessons from that, from all of these years, and that's why they understand that, the solution to Iran is never foreign intervention, but it's also not the positive appeasement. It's time to stand by the people of Iran to be able to bring about that true change that is needed. And hopefully, because you also have to understand right now, Iran is the #1 state sponsor of international terrorism. That's why you see the war is not just limited to Iran. Immediately from day 2 to day 3, it spread in the region. I mean, we are seeing, from Bahrain to Qatar to Saudi Arabia to Iraq to all these countries who are now, being targeted one way or another or dragged into this war. I mean, even the missiles of the regime have gone as far as Cyprus and Turkey. So that is quite a large concern, I think. And to be able to make sure that this war does not extend any further, it's really important to understand the role that the people of Iran themselves can play. Because right now, when you have bombs over your head, you're not going to be able to come to the streets and do anything or fight against the regimes. It's important to allow the people of Iran to do so, because I think they are the only legitimate force that can really take their destiny into their own hands and to be able to decide on the future of Iran.
No, yeah, I mean it's going to be very difficult for them. I mean, like kind of like what we're seeing right now, like you were saying, is not necessarily a collapse; it's instability. And the people of Iran are the ones that are going to have to make up for that, which is key. That's the one thing I think here that is key, different from other recent wars, if you want to call that, in the Middle East, is a lot of the times it was, Western military going in there, pushing the change, or other governments, not just the West, right? And this time there is influence, but it's a lot of the people there that are pushing it because they want, at least from my perspective and some things you have said, which is in any revolution, when you got the people behind it, it's a whole lot easier to make it happen. And then it's going to be sustained because you've got to have, just like any country and government king, you've got to have the support of the people in order to stay in power. One video I had seen last night is, I don't think a lot of people, and I didn't really realize this, I mean, I did, but I didn't, is Iran is a very diverse country. A lot of the world gets painted as it's just Persians, but there's like so many different sects, and like there's Kurds, if I'm correct on one part.
We have a
Yeah,
lot of different ethnicities, from the Kurds to Turkmen to Arab to Baluch. We have a lot of different ethnicities, and also a lot of different minority, other minorities that are in Iran too.
yeah, and I think that's something that the world should realize is they're a very, Iran's a very diverse country, and that's a good thing long term. And that's something like, Iran can be that anchor in the Middle East to kind of stabilize things and kind of go, okay, hey, like they were before, they kind of were that stabilizing force. And I think that will come again once there's a stable government there. Bombing a regime doesn't build democracy, like you were saying, in that aspect. But it's important that Iran's future belongs to the people. And obviously, you talked about the Shah, his son, terrible, his name,
Reza
Pahlavi.
Pahlavi.
So he at least publicly declared himself, or I don't know who declared him, the
He
transitional
declared
leader of Iran.
he declared himself. Everyone's like, "Who chose you?" I mean, you've been living your comfortable life for the past 47 years in the U.S. I mean, what have you done for the people of Iran to now try to steal their revolution and try to put yourself on the throne? Unfortunately, he is also making a lot of promises, which is quite alarming for Iranians. I don't know if you saw his interview with Fox and Friends, and he was like, "Yeah, you know, in other words, he said, well, if I am brought into power, I can guarantee like $1 billion in revenues to the US in the first year." And another interview with Laura Trump, he said, 1 trillion in the first decade. And everyone's like, well, that is exactly why your father was overthrown, because he was giving away Iran's wealth to the US. I mean, I don't think we want a repetition of that. And the people of Iran are not in the business of recycling tyrants and dictatorships. But the reality is that, unfortunately, he is trying to
reestablish.
I think he's just trying to use these circumstances and try to align himself to show that he would best serve Western interests. But the reality is that, the people of Iran had a revolution for a reason. It's very important for the world to realize that we don't want to go back to a, dictatorship. His father had a one-party rule monarchy, and he is mimicking that. And in fact, he has, in the last 47 years, he has not been able to form one organization that lasts over 6 months. He has not been able to put anything together. The first time that he has given a plan was in July of this year. And if you read that roadmap, when he hadn't given anything, people were still, guessing like, oh, he might be democratic or whatever. Because he said, well, I've been living in a democracy for 47 years, so I know like how it's done. It doesn't work that way. But this roadmap that he gives, it's a blueprint for a tyrannical rule. He places himself in the position of like the leader in transfer or something like that. And then first of all, he has reviving the Sabak, reviving the Eternal Guards, creating martial law in 20 major cities of Iran for the first year and a half. And then everyone responds back to him. There's no checks and balances, nothing. So he chooses those people who are in those key positions, and they respond back to him. So, this is like even worse than his father. Even during his father's time, there was a prime minister at least. So the people are like, everyone are like, no. And then he's already making threats against like Iran's ethnicities, against the Kurds, labeling them as separatists and this and that already to try to legitimize targeting them and having them, killed. He's already called for like military action against them. So, that in a, I don't see in any possible world for him to be able to actually be even a suggestion for Iran, because the reality is that the people of Iran don't want to return to the monarchy. The people of Iran have made it clear in their slogans. They say, down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the Mullahs, or no turban, no crown, democracy and freedom. That is the message. And now, I think one of the things that has been good is that he's now showing his true colors and his circle. Unfortunately, the things that we've seen in the past few months, we are seeing neo-fascism that they represent. The fact that they're celebrating Iran being bombed, their people being bombed. No one wants to see their people bombed. But the fact that,
Right.
first of all, they promoted it from the beginning, and then they're celebrating it. Not just the first day. The first day you say, well, they're celebrating the death of Khamenei. How about the week after, when they were celebrating in the streets while people of Iran are being killed in these bombings? They could care less, unfortunately. And the reality is that, some of their slogans, like in Munich, they were chanting, they had one of their speakers actually chanted, "One country, one flag, one nation." That is forbidden in Germany, if you don't know that, because that is the slogan of Hitler. And the fact that, and first everyone was like, oh, it was just one person. Actually, two people said it there. And then someone said it that same day simultaneously in LA. So it makes you think this branding or this, messaging, it's not just, something that just happened. This is their messaging. This is what they're pushing for. The fact that they're making threats and bullying Iranians. They have attacked people, like, for instance, just last week in London, they attacked a Kurdish restaurant because they opposed Pahlavi. Or they're going around, going to Iranian owned stores, and they're like, either you put up a picture of Reza Pahlavi or the flag of the monarchist flag with the crown on it, or you will deal with the consequences, and making threats against them. There's video footage of this in both London and Austria. They went to a restaurant, and they went in the middle of the restaurant. They're like, either you put up this flag in this picture, or we're going to ruin your life and we're going to ruin your business and everything. And then they go and approach the owner of the restaurant in the middle of the street. I mean, and they're beating people. Like, they go and attack protesters, other protesters who oppose Pahlavi. I mean, you're not even in power and you're already, this is how you're acting. So just imagine like what it actually means. And so like, the fact that they take the flags of the Savak to their demonstrations and they're like, Savak 2.0, revival of Savak, make Savak great again. Do you not know what Savak was? Because in history, it has gone down as one of the most notorious forces. But, and you can't say, well, that's his supporters. Well, where does he stand himself? Why doesn't he give a statement? He gives a statement for everything every other day. So why not give a statement on this? And it's not only his supporters, because his wife is also doing this. And also the 4 top advisors that he has have the same messaging if you look into their personal social media accounts. So, I mean, it's really, the people of Iran are really fed up with this and the fact that it is being pushed by interest groups, because he really doesn't have popular support. I mean, just till 6 months ago, he was not able to form a demonstration that like 300 people would attend in DC, and that's where he's based. And there are thousands of Iranians in the DC area, so that's not an issue. But like, he can't do that. I mean, he tried, he couldn't. Now, these things that you're seeing, a lot of it is manipulated. A lot of it is being pushed forward by interest groups who have interest in him being there. Not necessarily, I don't think, as a solution, but maybe it was, setting the grounds for what we're seeing right now. But the reality is that that's not what the people of Iran want. And it's very important for the world to realize that. I mean, they say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
Twice, shame on
The
me.
the people of Iran are not, they have the experience with Khomeini. And, Khomeini at least gave promises of democracy before arriving in Iran. I mean, this is completely something different. And I think that that is something that Iranian people feel very strongly about. And it's creating a lot of division. And that's why the Iranian regime has really actually used the Pahlavi card, to create division among Iranians and just make them become passive, because people are like, hey, if that's what's going to come next, we don't want it. So it makes them passive. And that is something that the regime has used. And in fact, there was an analysis by the regime last year, actually in May, I believe, that they actually spoke about that. They were like, he served us the most during the 2020, 22, 23 uprisings, because he created the division so large among Iranians that everyone just started becoming passive. And I mean, this is actual fact. And I mean, we have specific cases where like political prisoners have come and revealed this, that when they were being interrogated in prison, they were told, why don't you work with Reza Pahlavi instead of being, opponent of this regime, like in this format that you are. And they actually they're like, this is his mobile phone, call him, be in contact with him, we have no problem with him. So that should make you think twice, what is that connection? And the fact that the reality is like all of his top advisors are people who have defected from the regime in recent years. So I'm really not sure if they're actually defected from the regime or the regime is infiltrating his circle, because that is something that is seen and that is something that's clear, and that is something that I think the international community needs to see more, because this is more things that the Iranians have been dealing with, but maybe it's not being presented that much in the West. I think that the time has passed for return of a monarchy, I mean, in Iran. And the people of Iran want to see a true democratic government system in Iran. So that's why they are emphasizing on secular democratic republic. So secular means against theocracy. Democratic means against all forms of dictatorship, and the republic being against monarchy. So secular democratic republic is the positive messaging that the people of Iran have, and that is what they are calling for, and that is what they are trying to promote.
And that's very critical, especially when if they're trying to promote that. So we were talking a little bit about one of the most fascinating developments I thought, and it's kind of feeding off what you were saying a little bit, is in the opposition movement, women aren't just participating; a lot of them are leading it. And when women lead revolutions, the future tends to look very different.
That is one of the beauties, because I think that, for instance, the Iranian resistance movement, so National Council of Resistance, everyone is actually led by a woman, Mrs. Rajavi. And she has, I mean, her statements in the past few days since the start of the war are, I think it's very informative. And from day one, she made clear, like, where the people of, what is the stance of the Iranian people? What is the stance of the Iranian resistance? What is its call to action to the international community? And what is the call to action for Iran? And if you look, the statements that she has given, or those speeches that she has given, or messages she has given in the past 2 weeks, they really are like a guiding light for us to be able to move forward. But I think one of the things that she keeps on emphasizing is that even after the death of Khamenei, she gave a statement, and in it she reiterated that the NCRI and the provisional government are not seeking power, but rather the transfer of power to the sovereignty of the Iranian people. And I think that is one of the most important statements. And then she then also, again, she clarified the duties of, the provisional government, and then, till the provisional even government comes into power, like, what is the responsibility of the people of Iran? And then based on the provisional government, like, for instance, what happens after 6 months? What are those elections? What do they look like? The National Legislative and Constituent Assembly, what are its duties, and how that platform will look like. And I think that gives people in Iran, like, that reassurance that, we're set in a clear direction. And I think that's what's really important, is also that this resistance has, you know, um, proven the test of time, like the fact that
Yeah,
it's not just in words or in writing. People have seen what it stands for in practice, because 47 years of fight against this regime. The National Council of Resistance of Iran was formed in July 1981. 45 years almost, that every single day it has been just concentrated on the overthrow of this regime, and to be able to transfer power to the people of Iran. I think that consistency speaks volumes. And the
yeah,
fact that people know that they stand by their principles and their values, they're not ones to change with the wind, or change direction that fast. And so that is what really can safeguard the rights of the people of Iran, and to make sure that we're set on the right path. And I think that these are all very important signs and signals that we need to take into consideration. And as you said, yeah, Ms. Rajavi said once in 1996 in a speech in London that she indicated there that women are the force for change. And she said to Khamenei that you will be overthrown by the same force that you can't even acknowledge, and that is the women of Iran. And that is what we're seeing, how women are really leading this resistance, this fight to overthrow this regime in its entirety.
yeah, and it's going to be difficult. There's always, obviously, in the West, women's rights are a big thing here. And I know it's something you work on with in the Middle East. How will it? Because at least here in the West, they always say that the regime was obviously very oppressive of women, and from what we could see on TV here, that it was.
And it,
How's the IRGC power structure going to look? Are they still going to be around? How is all this going to like impact down the road? Because obviously the regime's weaker than it's ever been. Authoritarian systems always look to shocks before they panic, right? And then we were talking about we don't want another dictatorship, essentially, or another monarchy with the way the Shah was before. So how does all that impact with women and women's rights going forward with the potential for democracy?
well, we're talking about two different paths. One is when there is like a overthrow of the regime, so then the path is clear. Women's rights will be not only respected, but I think we will see women empowerment in Iran and women in leadership. If with the continuation of this regime itself, it's not going to back off, because the minute this regime gives any kind of freedoms to the people, that is when it will collapse. It's not going to collapse with a war, but it will collapse if it gives freedom to people. And that is something that they've learned and they know, and they learned from the Shah, because the minute that the Shah stopped execution and torture due to the human rights policy that President Carter was pushing forward, the minute he stopped, 18 months later, the Shah was gone. So people knew that, the risk was if you go to the protest, you might get killed, because 1,000 people were killed just in one protest. So it wasn't like the Shah wasn't using brutal force on the ground, and it wasn't like he just left without any bloodshed. But the people knew that that was a risk. But if you're arrested, you're not going to be executed or tortured. So people were willing to take that risk, and so that's why they were coming to the streets. With this regime, it knows the minute it starts giving some rights to people, the people of Iran will use that to overthrow this regime, and so they will never stop. So they can't back off their misogynist views against women, because that's how they're controlling half of society. And when you have half of society in your hands, in your chains, then you have control over the entire society. So that's not something that they can let go of. The same way they can't let go of having a supreme leader. So it's just like that system. That is what that system is built on. And that is what would lead to its demise. So we're not going to see that within this regime, no matter how weakened it has become. It's not going to, because this regime is not reformable. And that's what's really important. In nature, it can't be reformed. So that's why it's not going to.
Right. No, and what the predictions about the Middle East and the West are almost 99% of the time usually wrong. But to us here, there's a few realistic scenarios. Prolonged instability, the internal uprising, these things. The real question for us isn't whether it's weak or not, but who do you see? Like, what happens next? Who do you see filling that vacuum, filling that process? Like, how does
Well,
that play
as I
out
said,
towards
I
the
think
end
the
for you?
provisional government led by Mrs. Rajavi is the solution. And I think that, people of Iran can trust that, because they know they're not in it for power, because if they were after power, there were easier ways to gain power. If they were after, I mean, we actually had a women's conference about a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, and there it was very interesting to me. One of the in one of the side panels, one of the women there who was from Italy, I believe, she said, "Mrs. Rajavi has been fighting in been a part member of this resistance since she was 19. Every single day of her life since she was 19 has been dedicated to the fight for the freedom of Iran." I mean, anyone who meets her knows that she is, a woman with incredible potential to do whatever, right? If she was after power, there were other ways. If she was after fame, there were other ways. If she was after wealth, there were other ways. She has put that burden of this fight on her shoulder since the age of 19, but she has been leading this movement for 40 years now. So that kind of dedication for 40 years, every single hour of your life being dedicated to that, and not just being a member of this movement, having that responsibility on your shoulder, that is a totally different dimension of taking responsibility. And that is what people of Iran can trust, because they know she's not in it for herself, because she has been, in Farsi we have a saying, she's been melting like a candle. She has given everything in her life, sacrificed everything in her life, her personal life, everything, to fight this regime. And she has been the number one target of this regime for the past, 3 decades. And there have been numerous attempts on her life. She is the number one target of disinformation and misinformation and propaganda, but she's been able to keep fighting. And I think that is unprecedented in history. And I hope one day the world will be able to look at it and learn from it, because one of my greatest I think honors has been the fact that I've been able to witness it firsthand and to see it with my own eyes, because that is a level of dedication that is unprecedented, I think.
Yeah, and it's going to be. this is, for my lifetime, because I was not alive when the last Iranian revolution happened.
Neither was
Yeah,
I, but yeah.
so this is a first, for this generation, and for the younger generation, Gen Z. They've never really seen. They've seen the wars in the Middle East, right? But they've never, because Iraq's stabilizing now, but it was a quagmire. You know, the U.S. really dropped the ball there in a lot of ways. Because it was more of a forced change than it was self change, which means things are a lot more difficult that way because there's no lead, right? It's just a power vacuum, and it seems like this is going to look a lot different. And I've said in the show before, and I think I said to our last show is I'm all about supporting a revolution, especially if it's for democracy, but it has to come from the people. It can't come from us pushing it. Just like when the United States became an independent nation, the French helped us, but we were the ones leading the charge. You can't force change on people who aren't willing to put their own blood, sweat, and tears on the line, because then they have no, what do they say, no skin in the game. And the Iranians are ready for that. They're ready for that change. And I'm sure a lot of people these days now, the younger kids are probably seeing on TV or whatever media they use now, because TV is like ancient, I should say. They're probably seeing some of those videos of Iran, when the Shah was in power, and women seem to be able to do a lot more of what they do. I had I think I forget her name. She was on here a couple months ago, but she was in third grade when the revolution happened. And, she used to wear, she was a fan of Charlie Brown, Snoopy. After the revolution, she wasn't allowed to wear Snoopy socks no more, things of that nature. So the younger people never have seen that part of Iran, and that's where things seem to be going towards, where it's a little bit more of an open society like it was, and like you were saying, a secular society.
Well, I
And
mean,
that's
that's
good
not
for
the
them.
reality of the time of the Shah either, to be honest. So a lot of those videos that you're seeing, it's like,
Propaganda.
imagine like in 50 years, people will be like, what they see today on Instagram, they'll be like, that was how life was back then. It's not.
True, very true, very, very true.
It is propaganda, a lot of it, but because the people of Iran, I mean, they revolted for a reason. There were shanty towns in Tehran, right outside of, like in close vicinity. People didn't have running water, they didn't have electricity. They were people, even though Iran was a very rich country, unfortunately, it wasn't being used for the people. There was complete suppression. There was no organization, association, nothing were able to work back then. And everyone always feared the Savak. They taught children in their homes. They're like, don't be careful, because everywhere you go, there are people who are snitching. So there's a saying now in Farsi, but it comes from it comes in describing the Savak, but it says, watch out, the walls have mice and the mice have ears. And that's how
Yeah,
they describe the Savak. So I mean, I know people who still bear the signs of torture from the Savak on their bodies, and that is not something that we've forgotten. You can show, just imagine like in 50 years, people will be like, yeah, during Khamenei's time, people had, the country was evolving, people had internet, people had social media. That's with the times. It has nothing to do with who's in power. And then showing, the rich kids of Tehran, it's like it's a thing. It's on Instagram, I think. Showing that and saying this was life under Khamenei. That's not true. That is the propaganda that is being fed. And so it's really important to understand that. Was it better than the current regime? Yes. But was it a democracy? Were people free? No. Did women
no,
have a lot of rights? No. There's the Barbara Walter interview with the Shah and Farah, and he says, women are evil, this and that. And he says, well, of course, my 9-year-old child is more fit to rule the country than my wife. I mean, that was his mentality, and that was the mentality of the society, not the society of the government. And I think that we need to be realistic about what that era was. I mean, at the end of the day, the people of Iran, they weren't just, out of being bored. They didn't have a revolution out of being bored. They did had a revolution because it was needed. And that's why they wanted to overthrow the Shah. The only democratic government Iran has ever had in the past century is the 2 years under Dr. Mossadegh, who was prime minister. And that is even, it was he was aligning himself more with, he said, well, we had a constitutional revolution in 1906, so it's supposed to be a constitutional monarchy. You're not supposed to have full power. And he was able to push that forward and to be able to give people some right to nationalize Iran's oil and whatnot. But that only lasted for 2 years because it wasn't to the benefit of the West, and they had him removed with a coup d'etat, which was carried out by the CIA and MI6.
Yeah, the CIA, they don't seem to be as involved as they used to be in these things, which is, I think, a positive because, like
That
I
is
was saying,
positive.
it's about the people, and it's not knocking the CIA. I just want to put that out. It's just it matters that it's the people and not foreign influence making things happen, no matter the country. People in the United States forget that we don't like when people even are rumored to interfere in the elections here. A rumor sends people here up in a frenzy. Even though there was no concrete proof outside of Facebook groups, there was rumors. So, like, I think people in the West need to remember that as much as we like our values are not everybody else's values. The West has to learn to respect that, and they got to learn to support people for who they are in their regions of the world. And I think that's important. I think the West would find a lot more stability and find more partners that way. Zolal, I thank you for coming on. Is there any final message you want to give to people?
My final message would be, please try to keep yourself informed and check your resources. So you could go to NCRI for the latest on the situation on the ground, but also contact your lawmakers. Let them know what the people of Iran want. The people of Iran want to be able to take their destiny into their own hands. They are not looking for troops on the ground or being financially supported. They just want to be able to create that change themselves. And they also want to move forward in the 21st century to a secular democratic republic. They don't want to have to choose between the current regime and the previous. So no Shah, no Mullah, and going forward to a secular democratic republic. That's the message. So share it, talk to people about it, and raise awareness as much as you can.
Okay. Well, I thank you, Zal, for coming on the show today. Everybody feel free in the description. The links to her organizations are going to be down below. I appreciate everybody tuning in today and try to be positive, and we all wish the best for the people in Iran.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to
Thank
be
you.
with you.